How did Jesus press on this common belief that the reason why bad things happen is that people deserve it? It was a pretty gruesome sight. People came to Jesus to report that, hey, have you heard? There were people who had taken the trip all the way from Galilee to the temple in Jerusalem, and they had gone to worship. And Pilate, who was the Roman governor, sent troops over there to butcher them. No reason, just because he could do it. Raw violence, raw power, I can do it, and I'm doing it. Nobody can stop me, sort of power use. So people came to report it to Jesus. And Jesus' question to them was, well, do you think those people whose blood Pilate mingled with their sacrifice on the altar are worse sinners than anybody else in Galilee? Or what about those who perished when the Tower of Siloam fell? This was a tower that was part of the wall of Jerusalem on the southwest side. And nobody knows, was it construction problems or what have you, but it fell. And it fell on 18 people and they perished. What do you think? Jesus asked them, those people who perished, was it because they were particularly wicked? Of course not. And then he told them the story about the fig tree. We have the tendency to look at terrible things that happen in people's lives and to think, well, maybe they deserved it. Maybe they are poor because they are lazy. They haven't made the sorts of decisions I've made in my life. They haven't taken the opportunities they should have taken, and maybe that's why they're poor. Being poor is not a fun thing. It's a terrible, terrible thing. They lost their job. Well, maybe they lost their job because, and we come up with a way to explain it, a lot of times blaming the person who is suffering. Somehow, we may not come out to say it, but we think the person deserves it. Jesus is offering another way forward. He's saying, sometimes terrible things happen because there are Pilates in the world, people with great power, great influence, and they can make decisions to bring a lot of harm. That's true. But when that happens, Jesus says, instead of standing in judgment over those who suffer, he's saying, do whatever work you need to do in your own life. He's saying, take the opportunity to reflect on the fragility of life, on how quickly everything can change, and reflect on your own life. That's the invitation. To get out of the judging business and use that occasion to say, wow, it can really happen. To put in that much effort to go from Galilee, 7 days of walking to Jerusalem, to buy your sheep or goats or whatever it is they sacrificed on those days. You do everything right. You are there offering your sacrifice on the altar, and somebody, somewhere, unprovoked, who has power, can snap their finger and turn your world upside down or just end it. It happens. And Jesus is saying that if you happen to hear of it, if you happen to see it, if you happen to observe it somehow, instead of getting into judgment to try to explain it and defend it, use it as an opportunity to consider your own ways. Use it as an opportunity to consider your own ways. Come on now, Jesus, that's not a lot of fun. That's not a lot of fun. I would much rather sit here and speculate as to what it all means, who did what to whom, hey, maybe. And you notice all of that keeps my attention out there. Jesus is saying, turn it and consider, wow, they are no worse sinners than me. They are no worse people than me. That if it happened to them, it could happen to me. Consider your life. He's saying that consider your life not just because it's a good idea. He's saying you have a certain amount of window to consider your life. You have a certain amount of window. And when that window closes, it's done. When I was a chaplain in Trenton, New Jersey, I was going through seminary, and we had 10 weeks to be a chaplain at a Trauma 1 hospital. And before we started the program, our leader said, now, everybody gets a beeper, and sometime during your time here over the next 10 weeks, your beeper is going to go off with a very special number. That will be your invitation to consider whether or not to sit in on an autopsy. Okay? He gave us warning. This is the number. When you see it on your pager, you are deciding on that day whether to sit in on an autopsy. And sure enough, our pagers did go off. And because we had had a chance to think about it, some of us decided, well, there must be some reason he wants us to go through this, so I went. I have to tell you, I learned things that afternoon that I could not have learned any other way. And I remember coming home and talking to Anna about that experience. It took maybe 5 to 7 days of reflection, of thinking about what happened in that room, what that life meant, what all of this, just that experience. But after that, the window closed. The window has to close. We can't live there. You see what I'm saying? We can't live in that raw place. Nobody can. So when it breaks open, Jesus is saying, skip the judgment game. Use that window to consider your own life. This is Lent. This is a time to consider our lives. This is a time to get out of the judgment game and to say, wow, and what about me? To ask those kinds of reflective questions. That's the invitation that Jesus gives. I don't know what you think about that. But it's an invitation. My mind goes to the tree that is given one more year to bear fruit. I've been wondering, does this tree know that it is living on borrowed time? Does it know that it is living on borrowed time?